This is Pastor M.D. Lewis, the speaker for the Bible Interpreter Tapes. Our study in this time is entitled The Abomination of Desolation. Now this takes us to the 24th chapter of the book of Matthew, and I want to call your attention to the setting of this chapter concerning the last day events. I'm reading verse 1. Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him to show him the building of the temple. Now, the building of the temple is very important, and you recall it has to do with the physical temples that were built on the earth, the one built by Moses, replaced by the one built by David and Solomon, and then replaced by the one built by Ezra, Nehemiah, and Zerubbabel. And it is to this temple, after it was improved and rebuilt, that Christ has just visited for the last time and has come upon the Mount of Olives, from which this conversation is recorded that I'm reading in the 24th chapter of Matthew. So he's to show them the building of the temple. Now, obviously, the disciples have in mind the physical temple on Mount Moriah. All the time that they're talking about that temple, Christ is directing their attention to the fact that he is the great temple of which all the buildings on the earth referred. So unless the disciples saw that, they really didn't see the significance of the temple on Mount Moriah, and I'm sure they didn't. But the fact that they were going to make an attack upon Christ and destroy him would be indicative that their earthly temple on Mount Moriah would also be destroyed. Now, I want you to see how this, as we've said over and over in these studies, that the last day events come out of the significance of the most holy place of the temple in heaven. So that once you see here in this particular text that the temple is going to be destroyed, that is the physical temple of the Jews, inasmuch as they were going to destroy the person of Christ. Now, inasmuch as they're going to destroy the person of Christ, and Christ died for the sins of the entire world, then the destruction of Christ as a person is also a type of the destruction of the end of the world. And this is very significant as we see this development in the end of time. So when the disciples at the end of time receive the services of the most holy place, which shall bring their lives into complete accordance with the law of God and the life of Christ, and then when the world turns upon them, it is as if they were turning upon Christ himself. Now, he said to them, do not be deceived. You remember, they said, what will be the sign of thy coming and the end of the world? And he said, be not deceived, because there will become plenty of persons in my name claiming to be Christ, which we have already studied. Now I want to call, in connection with this, I want to call your attention to verse 15 of this chapter. Now 14 was the verse that states the gospel shall be preached unto all the world for a witness. Now you see how that is coordinated with the first angel's message. Now I want to read verse 15. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, or it would be probably more proper to say, the most holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee to the mountains, and so forth. Now this is a very significant prophecy, and it has a very interesting application to the last day events. Now in the book of Luke, the 21st chapter, the apostle speaks of the situation of which Christ here speaks of. For he said that when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, or holy places, or holiest place, now whosoever reads, let him understand. Then let them who be in Judea flee. In other words, when you see the armies surround Jerusalem, this is a definite sign of the last days, and certain efforts and facts will follow from that. Notice now this text in Luke 21:20. And when you shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Now here he adds the idea that the surrounding of Jerusalem by armies is equivalent to the sequence of desolation that shall come upon them. Then he went on to say, so let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains. Now you remember in connection with the Sunday laws, we showed that when the forces of evil in the last days surround God's saints with the decrees to force their conscience into submission to Sunday observance, it is as the armies around Jerusalem. So obvious then, that has something to do with the abomination that makes desolate. Now you see why Christ said, when you see the abomination standing in the holiest place, which represents the conscience of the individual, in which God has written his law in their heart and their lives. So Satan is going to make an attack and force the conscience of the people to bring them into subjection to his will. Now, the prophecy states that when you see this endeavor, that is, they are surrounding the people with the laws to force them to keep Sunday, and to move into their conscience, which is their most holy place, he said that abomination will bring the desolation of the earth. Now, it not only brought the desolation of the temple of the Jews by the Romans, which was in fulfillment of the Romans and the Jews destroying Christ's temple of his body, but it also has pertinence to the last days, and that is what we want to see. Now let us go into an observation of how this shall be brought about in principle, because this is very significant. I'm turning now to the book of Proverbs, the 30th chapter of that book, and reading this verse 5 and 6. Proverbs 30, verse 5 and 6. Every word of God is pure. He's a shield unto them that put their trust in him. Add thou not unto his words, lest he reprove thee, and thou be found a liar. Now we know, as it says in Psalms 19, verse 7, the law of the Lord is perfect. There are many texts that says that God's law is the truth. It is righteousness. That is, there is no defect in it. Now, if there should be someone who would endeavor to add unto his words, that person obviously would be ascertained as a liar. It would be just like stating that if 4 times 4 is 16, if someone endeavored to say it was 16 and 3 10,000s, he would be 3 10,000s wrong and a liar. If he tried to make it less by saying it's 15 and 99 hundredths, he still is not absolutely on the truth. So you cannot take away from 4 times 4 is 16. You cannot take away from the sum 16 or add to it and still have the truth. Now, I want you to see this principle. For it says in Ecclesiastes, the 3rd chapter, that verse 14, and I know whatsoever God doeth, it shall be forever. Nothing can be put to it, nor anything taken from it. Now, if the 10 Commandments is absolutely perfect, and we know it is, if Satan shall endeavor to add or detract in 1 iota from that, the text said he will be made out to be a liar. And in the book of Proverbs, the 12th chapter and verse 22, it designates a liar in a very pertinent way to our study by saying, Proverbs 12:22, lying lips are an abomination unto the Lord. So if Satan endeavors to make a change in God's law, he will be found a liar. He will be found a person establishing abomination, which is wickedness. And this abomination, as Christ said, will finally bring the destruction of the entire earth. Now, let us go back in the Old Testament and pick up the subject of the sanctuary and a certain abomination that came to it, and show how that this particular subject of the abomination of desolation is in the Old Testament, and Christ is referring to it, and its final application in the last days, and how it shall make the earth absolutely desolate. Now, I'm turning to 2 Kings, the 21st chapter, which has to do with Manasseh, one of the latter kings of Israel, the son of Hezekiah, and a very wicked person. I don't know of any character in the Bible that is described in wickedness that supersedes this man Manasseh. If there was any wickedness in Israel, he promoted it. And in this particular chapter of the 2 Kings 21, it says in verse 4, and he built altars in the house of the Lord, of which the Lord said, in Jerusalem will I put my name. And he built altars for all the hosts of heaven in the 2 courts of the house of the Lord. Now this man Manasseh entered actually into the sanctuary. and begin to set up false altars to the gods of paganism. Now, I hope that you begin to recognize now that they are invading the sanctuary, and they are abominating it by putting in these altars to wickedness. Now, notice what it says in verse 6 of the same chapter. He made his son to pass through the fire, and observed times, and used enchantments, and dealt with familiar spirits. That is, he dealt with spiritism in direct contact with the devil. And he brought much wickedness in the sight of the Lord to provoke him to anger. So that would probably be an understatement. He brought much wickedness. As I've said, I don't know of any character described in the Bible that supersedes Manasseh for violations of the law of God. Now in verse 7 it says, and he set a graven image of the grove that he had made in the house of which the Lord said to David and to Solomon his son, in this house and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, will I put my name forever. So it says here that in the house where God chose to put his name, in the sanctuary, Manasseh put up graven images in that very building and had the people to worship them. Now, I want you to see what is going on and how they declare this. Now, you understand the sanctuary represents Christ. The sanctuary also represents the saints. So, if the saints would put up in their lives some false idol to worship it, it would be a fulfillment of this particular affair that Manasseh manipulated among ancient Israel. Now, notice verse 11 of the same chapter, 2 Kings 21. Because Manasseh, the king of Judah, hath done these abominations. Now, out and out he says that his putting this image in the sanctuary was an abomination. And as a result of this, you recall, the sanctuary was finally destroyed. Now, let us turn to 2 Chronicles, the last chapter, that describes the final destruction of the temple. And it says in the 2 Chronicles 36th chapter, verse 14, moreover, all the chief of the priests and of the people transgressed very much after all the abominations of the heathen. Now you remember it was Manasseh that took an idol of the heathen, the most vulgar of their idols, and put it in the temple to be worshipped. So this text says that, moreover, the chief of the priests and the people transgressed very much after the abomination of the heathen, and polluted the house of the Lord, which he had hallowed at Jerusalem. Now, verse 16, they mocked the messengers of God, despised his words, misused his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord rose up against his people, till there was no remedy. Verse 19, and the Babylonians came, and they burnt the house of God, break down the walls of Jerusalem, and so forth. And then it goes on to say in verse 21, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the prophet of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed her Sabbath, for as long as she lay desolate, she kept her Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. So in these particular verses, it says the temple was polluted, it was destroyed, and because of the abomination of the pollution, it was brought to desolation. Now, do you understand that the temple here brought to desolation was a type of the temple in the time of Christ that was polluted by the Jews and brought to desolation by the Romans? And that temple of which he said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, now whoever reads, let him understand. Now let us turn to the book of Daniel and read concerning this abomination. In the explanation of the 2300-day prophecy of Daniel, the 9th chapter, and I'm reading now in verse 27, it says, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. That is, Christ shall confirm the covenant by living a righteous life and dying upon Calvary. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. That was his crucifixion. And for the overspreading of abominations. Now, that is exactly the same abominations that Christ had in mind, standing upon the Mount of Olives, overlooking the temple, and declaring that when you see the abomination standing in the holy place of that temple, know that the destructions of Jerusalem are nigh at hand. So here in this prophecy, For Christ, you remember, referred when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel. So this abomination, it says, shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and the determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Now, the word desolate in Hebrew has a marginal reading, and it is a more precise interpretation. It says, poured upon the desolator. Now there it's a person, and obviously refers to Satan, for he is the desolator. He is the one that led Manasseh to put the abomination of the idol in the temple and cause its destruction, and he is the one that is behind the Sunday laws to place himself as God and bring about an abomination that shall bring about the destruction of the whole world. So you see how the temple features very decidedly in the interpretation of the prophecies in the last days. So the destruction of the temple in the person of Christ and in the physical temple is a symbol of the destruction of the world in the last days. So it says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy or holiest place, then let he who is in Jerusalem prepare to leave, because it's going to be destroyed. Now you see what is how this application has been referred to in the last days in the writings of the Spirit of Prophecy, that when these Sunday laws go into effect, particularly was the comment made on the amendment to the Constitution, which is the first Sunday law, to indicate Babylon's fall. It says that the Sunday law is as the armies around Jerusalem. Because of the abomination of the temple by the Jews, the Romans would come and surround the temple and finally destroy it. And so we see the same application in the last days, when the people in the last days permit the day that Satan has instituted to be accepted in their mind and worship this particular day and thus worship Satan who instituted the law. They are putting in their mind an image purporting to be God, but is not God, which of course was the purpose of all those images in the temple that Manasseh put there. When that takes place, that abomination will bring the destruction not only of that person who does it, but all the people of the world who do it in the last days. Now you can see how it is very truthfully observed that the temple in heaven, and the most holy place in particular, has everything to do with the interpretation of the last day events as is found in the book of Revelation. Now, you recall that Christ said, as recorded in the book of Matthew, the 23rd chapter, concerning this very subject of which we're discussing, the 23rd chapter of Matthew and verse 38. Notice what the observation that Christ made. I'm reading now verse 37, verse 38. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets, and stonest them which are sent unto thee, how often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chicks under her wings, and ye would not. Now notice the sentiment of this observation. God has sent his prophets to the Jews to warn them of their abominations, of their wickedness. But they in turn destroyed these prophets until finally God sent his son. And you remember they said, now this man is heir, let us destroy him and take over the property. And you remember when he said that to the Jews, he asked them, well, what would God do in that case? Well, he said he would send forth his armies and destroy those people. And Christ could have said to them, you have just opened your mouth and declared your own punishment and destruction, for the Romans are going to send their army and destroy this city. So here you see he's alluding to the fact that God has sent his prophets and has sent his people to warn the world. Now, a person should make application of this to the last days, that the saints will be declaring that Sunday is not the Sabbath, and that this great abomination will enthrone Satan in their hearts and in their conscience, which will bring about not only the destruction of their lives, but the destruction of the whole world. So you must make the application, for the principles always operate the same. Now notice verse 38 in Matthew 23. Christ said, "Behold, your house is left unto you desolate. For I say unto you, you shall not see me henceforth, till you shall say, Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord." In other words, this shall be the last of their lives, and the next sight of Christ will be his coming at the end of time. So you see the desolation of the house here is pertinent to the last days. And of course, that is very, very true. So you see that these great prophecies of the last days are reenacting what took place in the time of Christ and his destruction in coordination with the destruction of the temple. So it's no wonder that Christ said to the disciples when they asked him, when he told them that there wouldn't be one stone upon another of that temple that they were showing him from the Mount of Olives, and you can get a very good look at the temple, I'm sure, at that time, for the Mount of Olives is about 250 feet higher than Jerusalem at that point, and to stand upon the Mount of Olives and look down across the Jordan Valley and over the walls of Jerusalem, there the temple would be the first building, and they must have had a very good view of it. So Christ is telling them there will be not one stone upon another in that temple, because not only shall the Jews abominate that building, they shall abominate the life of Christ and destroy him. And if they will do it, then Satan, who's behind it all, will in the last days bring about an abomination of the temple of the people's lives by instituting in its place a day of worship that is not in the Ten Commandments, and thus direct themselves to accept Satan in the place of God. And when they do, that abomination will bring the destruction of the entire world. And you can see how this is very pertinent to the Bible prophecies and comes out of the revelation of the sanctuary. Now, I want to call your attention before we conclude our study in the book of John, the 11th chapter and verse 21. A certain statement that Christ made in relationship to his dealing with Lazarus and Lazarus' death. In the 21st verse of that chapter, you remember Christ had left Jerusalem and left Martha and Mary and Lazarus, and in the interim of his absence, you remember Lazarus became sick and died. And finally, you remember Christ came. Now, the conversation of Martha with Christ when he returned, and at that time, of course, you understand, Lazarus was dead and was in the tomb. It says, as recorded in the 11th chapter and verse 21, "And then said Martha unto Jesus, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died." Now, I would like to know what Martha was thinking to make that statement, but I rather have an opinion that I may know something of her thinking. She had so much confidence in Christ and his person and the vitality of his life that if he were there, he certainly would do something to prevent Lazarus from dying. Now, they no doubt had observed his power in bringing other persons out of sickness, and they said, Master, had you been here, this would not have occurred. So, you see, the same effect and principle is pertinent in the last days. That if the individuals in the last days incorporate Christ and his righteousness, which is the first angel's message in the gospel, in their lives, there will be no ill to come of them. And when they fully come into relationship to God, as is depicted in the most holy place of the heavenly sanctuary, that is, that the law of Christ's righteousness is fully in their lives and in their conduct, then the abomination of desolation that shall bring the destruction of the world will not touch their person. And that is exactly what God is endeavoring to do, is to establish Christ in the lives of the saints, that they will not only detect the deception of this abomination and the impersonation of Christ, which we had in the previous study, which is related to it, they will not only be able to detect it, but they will be able to make certain pronunciations of the validity of the law of God as is revealed in the sanctuary. Now, I want you to see a certain observation brought forth in the Testimonies to Ministers, page 364. It says, "Rapidly are men arranging themselves under the banner that they have chosen, restlessly waiting and watching the movements of their leaders. There are those who are watching and waiting and working for our Lord's appearing. Now, that is the group that I have just spoken of in reference to Martha and Mary and their confidence that had Christ been there, their brother wouldn't have died. And then showing that the people in the last days shall so represent Christ in their lives that their redemption and their salvation shall be assured. So while they are incorporating into their person the humanity of Christ and his goodness, the same operation is working in the great field of the apostate. Now notice in this statement it says, while the other party are rapidly falling into line under the generalship of the first great apostate, they look for a God in humanity, and Satan personifies the one they seek. Now here comes the great paradox of Bible revelation and particularly the prophecies of the last days. The people are looking for God in humanity. Now they could have found it in Christ, but they killed him. Now if in the last days the people are looking for God in humanity, as this particular statement says, they will find it in the saints. But they're so deluded, they don't recognize the humanity of Christ in the saints, but they are taken up with the impersonation of Satan and the great abomination of Satan, which places his character in their lives, and he purports to be God on the earth, and this great abomination, when they accept it, will bring the destruction of their person and the entire world. Now that is a paradox of prophecy, that the people are looking for God in humanity, and they accept Satan as that exhibition of God in humanity, are so deceived that they don't know the difference. At the same time, Christ is portraying himself in the person. Now you see the same thing took place in the Jewish nation in the final aspects of their probation as far as God's chosen people. You remember Pilate said to them, supposing we put up Barabbas and this Christ. Now Barabbas in Hebrew means son of God, and that's the title that Christ had. So he put two sons of God up. One was a murderer and one was the righteousness of God. And they chose Barabbas over Christ and killed Christ. Now you understand the same thing's going to be done in the last days. And that abomination, when it comes into the holiest place of the people's lives, which is their conscience, that will bring the destruction of the world. How important it will be for God's people to be representing Christ's humanity in totality, that they may represent the life of the world in the last days.